Recently, I have been helping many people who want to become programmers learn programming. During this time, I noticed many mistakes that these individuals often make. In this episode, I wanted to share with you the 19 most common mistakes in learning programming that are worth avoiding. If you are just starting to learn programming and want to become a programmer, be sure to watch this video until the end. Hello, this is Kazimierz Spin. Welcome to the Code with Kazik channel, where I demonstrate how to effectively learn programming and become a successful programmer. Spending too much time choosing a programming language. I even recorded an entire episode on this topic once. If you want to start learning programming, just pick any programming language. I know quite a few people who spend months trying to choose the right language, wondering which one is the best, and over time they lose motivation to learn. There is no such thing as the best language. Each one can be better in different situations. If you want to learn programming to find a good job, I highly recommend C#, but you could just as well choose Java, JavaScript, PHP, Go, or Python. At this stage, it doesn't matter much. If in the future you need to switch languages, it will be much easier for you if you have already learned another one. So pick any language and start programming. The second mistake is learning several programming languages at the same time. This is somewhat related to the previous point. Sometimes I get messages from people who claim to know PHP, Java, JavaScript, and C# simultaneously, but can't find a job. If you're a beginner and think you know many languages, you probably don't know any of them well. Focus initially on mastering one programming language. Start by learning the syntax, and over time, begin writing simple applications, then move on to more advanced ones. If you try to use several languages at once, their syntax may confuse you later, and as I mentioned, you won't have the time to learn each of them at a good level. At most, you'll only know some basics, and to find a job, you need to have a broader knowledge. The company you work for will likely expect you to be proficient in just one language, so there's even less reason to spend time learning several. The third mistake is focusing too much on choosing an IDE. This may seem trivial, but I often see beginners spending many hours selecting the right development environment. Depending on the language, there are different environments. For example, C# developers often struggle with whether to choose Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, or Rider. Once they make their choice, they start thinking about further extensions, colors, and add-ons. But in reality, it doesn't matter much. To begin with, it's worth choosing one environment. For C# developers, Visual Studio is definitely a good option to program in. The longer you work in one environment, the more efficient you'll become. It's beneficial to gradually learn some keyboard shortcuts to make programming more comfortable. It doesn't matter whether you use a light or dark theme, just program. The fourth mistake, continuous learning of theory with too little practice. You can read many books and blog articles, but if you don't start applying the knowledge you've gained, it will slip away. In my opinion, the best way is to use what you've learned in practice right after studying a topic. For example, if you read in a book about writing unit tests, spend some time writing those tests afterward. If you're learning from online courses, do the same. Try to apply the theory in practice right after you learn it. If you've seen how to generate a PDF, start a new project and try to implement it in your application. Fifth mistake, not creating your own applications. I always say that the best way to learn is by building your own applications. It's clear that when you start learning, those applications won't be very complex, but you have to start somewhere. At first, you can write small applications, and over time, as your knowledge grows, those applications will have more functionality, adhere to better principles, and most importantly, you'll reinforce the knowledge you've learned. Additionally, this allows you to build your portfolio or impress a future employer during a job interview. In such a situation, your chances of finding a job will definitely increase. Sixth mistake, learning programming by heart. I made this mistake myself when I started my programming journey. I thought I had to memorize all the syntax, various methods, classes, parameters, methods, or return types. Nothing could be further from the truth. You should never learn programming by heart. It's enough to know, or even better, to understand how something works and why, but it's not worth memorizing everything. If you need to use some external library or call methods that you rarely use, you can calmly search for information, preferably in the documentation, to see how it should look, rather than trying to memorize it. Error number 7. Copying solutions without delving into the details. It may happen, especially at the beginning of your learning, that you encounter a problem you can't solve. In such situations, you will look for information online. You might find a solution on a forum, some sample code that you can use in your application. However, if you are copying someone else's code, make sure to try to understand the details. See exactly what that code does. Understand why your previous solution didn't work while this one does. This way, you will develop much faster. I know people who simply copy a solution from some portal and still don't know where the previous error was, why the application didn't work correctly before, but now it does. They are only interested in the fact that the error has been fixed, but it doesn't matter how. In my opinion, this is a wrong approach. It's worth spending more time on it and delving into the problem, as this will help you develop much faster and, most importantly, you are likely to avoid making a similar mistake in the future. Error 8. Poor debugging skills. This is another mistake I often encounter. I frequently receive messages from people who have a simple error in their application and cannot diagnose it. Usually with good use of a debugger, finding the error in such situations takes literally just a few minutes. In your press, you will certainly often have to look for some errors in various applications, and without understanding how a debugger works, it will be very difficult for you. Error 9. Not asking questions. If you have a problem that you can't solve for a long time, don't be afraid to seek help from others. Similarly, if you don't understand a particular topic, try to ask, if you have the opportunity, your programmer friend, or perhaps on some forum for clarification. It often turns out that someone has had a similar problem before and will be happy to help you. Asking questions does not reflect poorly on you. You are just starting to learn, so it is obvious that you won't know everything yet. Of course, you shouldn't overdo it either. Don't ask about every trivial thing. If finding a solution in a search engine takes you a few minutes, then of course start with that. Error 10. Lack of patience in learning. Learning to program is not a sprint, but more like a marathon. You won't learn programming in just a few days or even weeks. If you're starting from scratch, you need to dedicate at least a few months to learning. Programming isn't always easy. Sometimes you may not understand everything right away, but over time, as you explore new topics, programming will become more comprehensible to you. It's important to be patient at the beginning and not get discouraged by potential setbacks. I admit that I had doubts at the start of my journey when I struggled to grasp some basic concepts, but over time, with further study, everything became clearer. Error 11. Lack of systematic learning. If you want to become a programmer, don't postpone your dreams. Once you start learning and have the opportunity, try to study systematically. You can set a goal to spend X hours a week or daily on learning programming and stick to that plan. Systematic learning will bring you the most benefits. It's not worth taking several months off when, for example, you lose motivation to study. Returning to learning after such a break can be quite challenging. Error 12. Not utilizing your previous projects. Another advantage of creating your own projects is the ability to use code that you have already written. The more personal projects you have, the easier it will be for you to program in future projects. If you have already written code, for example, for sending emails, then if you need to implement it again in another project, you already have the code ready for use. It's worth setting up your own repository, which can be completely private, where you will store your projects. In the future, you will definitely be able to reuse some of the code. Error 13. Lack of a learning goal. It's always good to have a learning goal. Not only does it give us greater motivation and desire to learn, but we also focus on that goal and do everything to achieve it. If you are just starting to learn, your first goal will likely be to find your first job as a programmer. For example, you could set a goal that in 6 months or even sooner, regardless of what happens and at what stage of learning you are, you will send out several CVs to different companies to verify your skills. This will definitely give you more motivation to learn. Of course, you can have other goals as well. For instance, your first goal could be to write your first web application. Whether it's a desktop application or anything else, it's important to set a date and do everything possible to achieve that goal. Mistake 14. Not taking breaks during study sessions. Here, I mean breaks throughout the day. If you have planned several hours for learning programming, remember not to sit in front of the computer for hours without a break. Such studying can be less effective. It's worth taking short breaks from time to time, as this will help you absorb the knowledge better. Your body also needs rest. For example, you can dedicate 30 minutes to studying, then take at least a 5-minute break before returning to study. During the break, it's best to step away from the computer. Then again, 30 minutes of studying followed by a 5-minute break. If you feel more fatigued, you can extend the break. Mistake 15. Being too critical of your knowledge. It also happens that some people, despite spending a lot of time learning programming, still feel that their knowledge is insufficient to become a programmer. Remember that the best way to verify your skills is through job interviews, and it's worth sending out your CV, as you will gain new experiences from each interview. Alternatively, you will see what you still lack and what you should focus on to receive a job offer in the next interview. It is known that if you are looking for your first job, you may still have some gaps in your skills, but to get your first job, you don't need to know everything. Moreover, even after you have a few years of experience as a programmer, you still won't know everything. A programmer learns throughout their entire career, and you will develop your skills the fastest while working in that position. Mistake 16. Thinking that we know everything. This is somewhat the opposite of the previous point. A too critical view of your skills is not good, but you also cannot think that you know everything. Especially since if you start to believe that, you will stop developing. As I mentioned, a programmer learns throughout their career, and it is usually the case, regardless of what we learn in any field, that at some point we start to think we know everything about a specific topic, only to later realize our shortcomings and understand that it wasn't entirely true. It's always worth listening to others, especially more experienced colleagues, and not closing yourself off to new knowledge while continuously developing. Error 17. Lack of skills in searching for relevant information. A programmer must be able to solve various problems in their work, especially at the beginning of their career or studies when you will encounter different issues for the first time. In such situations, you need to be able to search for relevant information online. It is usually worth looking for information on various forums or websites, in books, courses, blogs, but above all, it is also important to read documentation. You must continuously develop this skill because both during your programming education and in your job, you will often need to do research on a given topic, so it's worth doing it well. Here, knowledge of the English language can also be useful as you will find the most content in that language. Error 18. Getting distracted while studying. If you're studying at home, it's worth finding a place where no one will distract you. Learning programming definitely requires your focus, so pay attention to all distractions. Ask your household members not to disturb you while you study, silence your phone, avoid checking social media, don't check your email, and it's best to turn off all notifications. If something distracts you, it can be hard to get back to studying later. If you plan to dedicate an hour to studying, make the most of that time. Sometimes you can use an hour of focused study more effectively than several hours where you're constantly interrupted. Error 19. Not enjoying the learning process. Lastly, remember that learning programming should bring you joy. Try to learn in a way that suits you best. If you want to learn from YouTube videos, watch them and try to practice. Similarly, if you prefer online courses, purchase a course and learn from it. If you like studying from books, then study from books. If you want to start writing an application right away, go for it. Set increasingly ambitious goals for yourself. If learning to program doesn't bring you joy, you'll likely give up after a few weeks. So, try to enjoy it, because programming, at least in my opinion, is really great. These were the 19 most common mistakes in learning to program that people aspiring to be programmers often make. I try to make all participants in my training become a .NET programmer, aware of many of these mistakes, where I teach programming in C# on the .NET platform from scratch. If you're interested in learning programming under my guidance, I also invite you to join. The registration link is visible below this material. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this film, be sure to join my community, where you'll also have access to exclusive additional materials and, most importantly, fantastic special bonuses. The registration link is located in the description box below the video. See you in the next episode.